This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Marc Godin. I work with PTAC, the Petroleum Technology Alliance Canada, and we are a plus 20-year-old industry association that focuses on introducing new technologies into the oil and gas sector in Canada. And we are a close collaborator with CRIN, the Clean Resource Innovation Network. And it's in this broad context that we offer this event today. It's we call it Focused Conversation. In the program that it is in set is in the context in which it's set. It's TEREE. It stands for Technology for Emissions Reduction and Eco-Efficiency. And our TEREE program has been running for over 10 years. And it encourages collaboration, networking, and introduction, again, of new technologies, in this case for energy efficiency, methane emissions reduction, and greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So I'm excited to have a good program today. We run these short events. It's 2 hours or less every couple of months. We focus on a more of a conversational style. There's a lot of webinars out there and maybe webinar fatigue. We try to make it more conversational and encourage participation. And we run those about every couple of months and focus on news of the day or issues of the day or opportunities of the day. So there'll be another one in a couple of months, 2 or 3 months, and whatever is of visibility, a high interest at that time, we will focus on our agenda on that. Before I start the program, I want to have a few words, safety moment and a few words of logistics. The safety moment, as has been for the last several months, is the COVID-19 pandemic. And as everyone is aware, unfortunately, the infection numbers are escalating. We're hitting records and in many provinces, and it encourages everyone to follow with even more vigilance the public health advisories in your jurisdiction. The logistics aspects, we are recording this event, so it will be available on demand from the PTAC website, as well as the slides, photos, and PowerPoints of our panelists. We encourage the audience to turn their microphone off to give a good audio quality throughout the event, and also your video camera to minimize bandwidth. We certainly, everyone, whether it's schools or businesses, have turned online, and it is causing sometime transmission delays or cutoff. And if you minimize the bandwidth, it will ensure better audio and video quality of this event. So without further, so the last item on logistics is questions. So we invite you, all of you, panelists and audience, to ask questions of our speakers and panelists through the chat function of this GoToMeeting platform. And Shay Sharma on the PTAC side will be monitoring the chat, and she will turn her mic on at the right time to ask questions on your behalf within the time limitations that we have. And if we run out of time to ask all the questions, we will note them and forward them to the person to whom the question was directed so that they can follow up on it. So we have a full agenda. Again, I thank all our speakers for preparing and for contributing their time and being on camera today and answering your questions as they come up. So our first speaker to set the tone for this event is Vanessa White, Director at Alberta Innovates. And I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Vanessa here. She has been a very strong participant in the industry from the government side, and she will speak to us about the importance of government funding to support innovation. So Vanessa, I'll turn it over to you.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mark and the PTAC team, for the opportunity to open today's focused conversation on government funding and its importance. Lauren, will my slides be coming up? Awesome. Excellent. Thank you. You can go to the next slide. I want to start off with discussing the goals of government funding. And this is a big list with a lot of strong statements that illustrate the value of government funding, but they all coalesce into one statement. And that is that government funding is important to accelerate technology and drive commercialization to maximize impact. Next slide, please, Lauren. To illustrate the depth and breadth of government support that is available for technology development, I've put together this slide. And I've broken it down into the types of financial instruments and funding objectives. And so when we talk about financial instruments, there's grants, which is the most common tool used for organizations like Alberta Innovates, Emission Reduction Alberta, on the federal side, SDTC and NRCan. And these are non-repayable capital investments that help innovators and their clients manage the risk of technology development. We also have loans. A good example of a repayable or partially repayable loan that's available right now for funding is the Federal Emissions Reduction Fund. Venture capital and equity financing, those are tools that are used more frequently on the federal government side of things. There's also youth employment through METAX and Eco Canada, as well as tax credits, both provincial and federally, in the form of carbon credits and SHRED. The other type that I wanted to talk about are these funding objectives. And I've broken it down into its two primary components. One is the technical de-risking, and the second is business building. So on this technical de-risking, we're talking from early stage TRLs and scientific discovery to later stage TRLs and technology demonstration. Funding organizations work with innovators to provide support that's needed to answer the question of, can the technology do what it's designed to do? We do this by following the scientific method through the critical stages of proof and concept and pilot to prove the technical capabilities, and then demonstration to validate the economics, environmental outcomes, and commerciality. If we want to talk a little bit about who plays in which space, NSERC is very, very active in those early TRL stages of scientific discovery. Alberta Innovates Clean Resources, which I'm a part of. We support projects in the TRL 3 to 7 range, the technical valley of death, and then ERA supports projects in the higher TRL 7 to 9. On the business building side, we really want to focus there on early commercial through to market adoption of a technology. And a good support system there is Alberta Innovates Entrepreneurial Investments team, and they support business building alongside of incubators, accelerators, the federal IRAP program. The perspective that this slide provides is that government funding really helps to build businesses and advance the technology that is at the core of the business. Mark, that's the end of my slides.
Hi, Mark, you're mute.
Oh, Mark, I cannot hear you.
My apologies. I did follow my own instructions and muted myself, but now it's okay. Yeah, that's a lot of objectives and a lot of program options, Vanessa. And I'm sure there's a whole team behind the scenes that works the details and how do you get to a specific call, and what criteria and what is the process to get to a specific call, whether it's high TRL, low TRL, and technology de-risking or the market side.
That's a great question, Mark. Thank you so much. So the programs that we offer are generally developed through consultation and gap identification. We have some clear goals that those programs are designed with. And programs start and eventually evolve to be fit for purpose. And so, as you said, Mark, the calls can be designed to be very, very broad or very narrow, depending on those specific goals or the gap that's being addressed. And so I think the best way to describe this is to use some examples. So in 2018, Alberta Innovates launched Karen. The original concept for that one was that it was going to be the Canadian version of METEC down at in Colorado. And what it's evolved into now is a pan-Canadian network of oil and gas producers, innovators in methane detection, quantification, mitigation technologies, academic institutions, and commercial laboratories, all working together to advance towards the emissions reduction goals that have been set by governments and individual organizations. Can I ask that whoever's just joined, could you mute yourself? I'm getting quite a bit of feedback. Thank you. In 2019, we launched the DICE call, and that was designed to accelerate development in digital innovation in clean energy. Projects needed to be short in duration and under $200,000 of an investment ask. And on the execution side, we really minimized the application and approval timelines because the industry of digital is one that moves fast. And so we had to prove that we as an investor or a granting agency could move fast as well. These are just a couple of the Alberta Innovates examples. There's other programs that are recently announced to close gaps. There's the Federal Emission Reduction Fund focused on wide-scale development or deployment of emissions reduction technologies, ERA, Shovel Ready Challenge, and their energy savings for business to increase the adoption of energy efficient technologies. And so really the goal from a funding perspective is to discover these gaps early and get programs in place to help innovators move their technologies along that TRL scale towards commercialization.
Awesome. So if we dig a little deeper in this space here of this audience, which we're focused on energy efficiency and methane emissions reduction, what technology pathways or gaps have your research identified for this audience or these technology needs?
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, the biggest issue that we see is that valley of death. So that is moving from a successful lab scale test at a TRL of 4 up to a commercial prototype at that TRL of 7. And getting that first pilot is one of the most challenging steps in developing a new technology. And specifically in this emissions reduction space, this is having access to a live testing environment where you're working with real operations, real world conditions. And it's a very, very challenging step for a lot of innovators to be able to find that first mover or early adopter for their technology. The energy industry is very, very good at being first, at being second. And this is most frequently a factor of economics, not of disinterest in innovation. Government funding can help to remove the economics from the equation, or at least reduce the impacts of economics from the equation. And that allows the technology provider and an industry partner focus on reducing the technical risk to ultimately prove that the technology will perform as it was originally designed. One of the key pieces that we see from a program perspective or from a project perspective is that value of collaboration. And it has definitely been proven to be another component that helps remove those economics from innovation development. And it can take many forms. In its simplest form, it's the end user support to demonstrate that there's a market pull, that this technology is something that somebody really wants and will actually help solve a problem that exists in the real world. And then there's more complex collaboration through consortia with multiple end users pooling the resources to evaluate multiple technologies. And this is where an organization such as PTAC really helps make a difference in bringing those consortia together.
Okay, thank you, Vanessa. So I'll just turn it over to Shay here. Do we have, I think we only have time for one question from the audience.
We have no questions, Mark.
You have no questions. Okay, perfect. So thank you, Vanessa. These were awesome comments. And there's a lot, there's a lot to unpack in those comments. It's very concentrated, and we welcome all the thoughts and the preparation you did for this.
Oh, no problem at all. Thank you so much, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Vanessa. So I will now move on to keep us on track to our next item on the agenda, which is modern wellbore and 7th-generation energy. And in that segment, we will talk about a technology called the multilateral junction tool assembly. And I'm very excited that we're able to present that to this network. When we think of multilateral junction, we think of cost, we think of offshore, we think of drilling efficiency, completion efficiency, but it has a very large impact on emissions, both greenhouse gas and methane. And I'm very pleased to have Kara Tardif, Vice President at Modern Wellbore, and Emil Abu Khalil of 7th-generation, apologies, to cover those points. And I'll first turn it over to Emil of 7th-gen. Please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. I'm just gonna wait for the slides to come up here. I'm not sure who's putting them up. There we go. So just to introduce myself, my name is Emil Abu Khalil. I'm one of the senior drilling engineers that work for 7th-generation Energy. So who are we? We're essentially Canada's largest producer of high-value condensate. We also produce natural gas and natural gas liquids. What's in the meaning of our name? So our name is essentially based on an old Iroquois concept, and it's we're committed to responsible development and ongoing considerations of how our decisions today will affect stakeholders 7 generations into the future. So we are indeed a low carbon intensity producer, and we achieved the status among our peers through our commitment to innovation and the adoption of best practices in energy efficiency and emissions management. Our goal is to be one of the largest carbon intensity natural gas producers on a per barrel of oil equivalent basis. Why is managing our GHG emissions and developing a climate strategy material to our business? Well, we understand that impacts related to GHG emissions are increasingly becoming more and more important to our stakeholders, and that is our responsibility to mitigate these impacts. Our operations are subject to also GHG emissions regulations, including carbon pricing policies that are constantly evolving and that impact our financial performance. So having a climate strategy helps mitigate climate-related risks to our business, and it will inform our evolution in a changing industry and society. We also believe that the Canadian energy industry can thrive despite ever-increasing expectations of what it means to be a responsible energy producer. So 7G has a culture focused on meeting these challenges, viewing them as opportunities to differentiate ourselves to the benefit of our stakeholders and Indigenous communities. We were in fact the first natural gas company in the world to obtain equitable origin standard for responsible energy development, and this certification is awarded to companies that meet or exceed certain criteria for ESG performance evaluated by equitable origin. So what does the certification entail? It's essentially awarded, like I said, to companies that meet those certain criteria for environmental, social, and governance performance evaluated by equitable origin. And the certification requires exacting standards and assurance procedures that must be proven through rigorous internal and third assessments of ESG performance across the organization at the site level. For 7G, this included independent interviews with our stakeholders and Indigenous communities and technical inspections of our facilities. So this certification actually helped us in securing with Quebec's main natural gas distributor an agreement between us to sell responsibly sourced natural gas. So just kind of here to conclude and to just give a segue here to Kara with Modern Wellbore Solutions. We believe that GHG mitigation technologies, we believe a lot in them. Their cost-effective reductions will come from the development of new and evolving technologies and strategies. And as a company, on an annual basis, we review new technologies and the potential benefits to our operations. And these costs of deployment of new technologies and other proven strategies vary from year to year. So one of those technologies that we believe is going to be a big stepping stone for us on the GHG side reduction is the multilateral that Modern Wellbore Solutions is developing with our help. So from here, I'm open to questions, and I'll also pass it over to Kara. Mark, I think you're still on mute.
Sorry about that. So we'll pass it over to Kara and we'll take questions at the end.
Thank you.
Hey, Lauren, if you could bring up my slide. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Emil. Thanks, Lauren. So I'm Kara Tardif. I'm part of the development team over here at Modern Wellbore Solutions. So I'm here to talk about a project that we've recently received funding for and currently developing with 7 Generations. So I'm just going to address what the industry problem that Modern is addressing. So the cost efficiencies realized by operators by pad drilling and completing multi-stage fracturing horizontals are becoming more difficult to attain. Given the current economic and public health crisis, the depressed price environment is compounding to operators' difficulties to attain sustainable profitability and economic performance. So what is an innovative and environmental solution to this problem? Well, Modern Wellbore Solutions, which was founded in 2015 by Kyle Clam, has developed a multilateral junction tool and process, which will allow operators to economically and environmentally drill, complete, and operate wells in onshore unconventional reservoirs. So Modern's Wellbore technology project is currently being supported by Emissions Reduction Alberta, Sustainable Development Technology Canada, Alberta Innovates, the Natural Gas Innovation Fund, and TEREE. This funding is supporting the development of the tool and the process from its current state, which is approximately at a TRL 6, to reach a TRL 9, so early commercial product. Through the development of increasingly difficult and de-risking demonstrations, Modern will realize a market solution with a significant capital and environmental savings to operators by the end of this project. As Emil just mentioned, 7 Generations is currently Modern's technology demonstrator and collaborator through this innovative process. We have been working closely alongside with them for the last several years on this technology development roadmap for the industry. So where are we today in the project? Modern has just recently completed its first pilot demonstration back in October. The pilot was a success and reached its target goals set out for the demonstration. We're currently working towards our next pilot demonstration, which is targeted for early 2021. Lauren, could you go to the next slide, please? Thanks. Modern's Wellbore multilateral tool and process is an innovative solution to help reduce the petroleum industry's environmental footprint and foster social and economic benefits per multilateral well. Basically, it works by a tubular system that couples and moves during operations to build the subsurface junction from the surface using a drilling rig. The technology can be run in the same or different fractured reservoirs, providing optionality to the end user. Current technology options create the following barriers for unconventional resource development. Multiple costly and time-consuming well entries in order to install current market junctions and options, limitations to the internal diameters of the junctions on the market, prohibiting passing of fracturing tools, as well as the pressure integrity of junction is dependent on the costly well construction design and modification during operations, leading to costly operations to the end user. Basically, Modern's technology realizes cost efficiencies to the end user through single entry systems into the well with no diameter barriers, and pressure integrity operations is achieved within the tool. We are a patent pending technology. We currently just actually passed our final examination with the UPTSO, and we will be receiving our first issuance for our patent portfolio. So by the elimination of that vertical wellbore per horizontal, this technology leads to reduction in capital and operating costs by 30 to 50% and a GHG emission savings of approximately 30 to 50% depending on the number of subsurface junctions installed. Based on conventional operations and practices, one multilateral junction over the lifespan of a well can reduce up to approximately 17,000 tons of CO2 equivalent, with 70% of those emissions realized upon installation during the development and the drilling operations of the installation. The remainder of the emission savings is realized through the production and abandonment activities of the well. One could think of this as planting 44,000 trees and allowing them to sequester carbon over the life, providing a cleaner, healthier climate, as well as reducing approximately 17,000 trash bags from the landfill, from the reduction of drilling cuttings, from the elimination of a vertical wellbore per horizontal gain, as well as you can think of it in terms of reducing approximately 35,000 liters of water usage from the elimination of a vertical wellbore per horizontal gain. So what are we here to ask to the group? Modern is looking for operators interested in participating in further project demonstrations or merely wanting to understand their specific value proposition pending their operations and reservoirs. As Mark mentioned, PTAC can pass along my information for anyone who is interested in talking offline from this forum, and we can take some questions right now if there's any.
Great, thank you, Kara. That's a great overview, and it's from the network here. It's a non-traditional way of reducing both GHG and methane and fugitive emissions. And Shay, do we have questions from the audience?
No questions so far, Mark.
So I'll just ask Kara to elaborate a bit on both the GHG and the methane. So the GHG are mostly from not drilling so many vertical wellbores, right? That's diesel and energy consumption.
Yeah, exactly. So the bulk of the emissions are from less construction intensity at the front of the installation. So bringing all of your materials to the well site and all your trucking, and then your rig time and the operations for drilling that vertical well down to your target zone of interest. That is the bulk of the emissions savings due to the changings of regulatory requirements when all the methane, zero methane well site changes happening in the upcoming future. We're constantly reevaluating and looking at our emission savings as we develop pilots over the next several years. We'll be quantifying that from the end user third-party validation. But yes, there is a significant savings from the construction intensity of moving away from a single wellbore lateral to one vertical and multiple laterals.
Yes, and then the other parts of the emissions is during production, and that comes from having fewer surface facilities, like you have fewer chemical pumps, pneumatic instruments, wellheads, and it's fewer of them. Maybe they're bigger, or maybe they operate at higher rates for longer periods of time, but there's fewer equipment on the surface that can leak and create emissions. And I just want to also bring up, Kara, that these are not just concepts. You have quantified those things by sponsoring a study going back maybe a couple of years ago, and you have numbers. You won't need to get into it today, but you do have backup for all this.
Yeah, we did a study several years ago based on 7Gen's operations with the Delphi group. So they did a third-party theoretical quantification of our savings. As we evolve through our technology roadmap and working with the government agencies such as SDTC, we are continually revalidating those GHG numbers, which we'll be doing that again actually in the next 2 months. And then working with 7 Gens as well to understand the actual field third-party validation of those numbers. And obviously the surface facilities and the drilling operation savings are specific to each end user. However, the understanding is obviously the more junctions installed subsurface, you will be incrementally increasing your savings on the GHG side.
Awesome. Perfect. So thank you, Kara, and thank you, Emil, for a quick introduction to this exciting technology. That's you mentioned TRL 6, but hopefully next year it'll be
We're kind of at 7 right now, but we're definitely moving.
okay. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so next up is segment number 4 of our event today, and it is with Westgen Technologies and Canadian Natural Resources Limited. And we will together review the EPOD Lite unit, which is a new unit from the Westgen family of products. And I'm glad to have Ben Klepacki of Westgen and Tim Michaelis of Canadian Natural to lead us through this conversation. So I will turn it over now to Ben.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm going to do a quick maybe summary of Westgen, what we've done before, and then I'll get into the EPOD Lite project and where we're going with that. Thank you everyone for taking some time out of your day to come and listen. Myself, my name is Ben Klepacki, as Mark mentioned. I'm a co-founder of Westgen Technologies. We're an Alberta-based clean tech startup with a mission statement to try and help the industry meet its ESG targets in an economic fashion. As I mentioned, I'm going to touch on methane venting from pneumatics, so identifying what the problem is, some of the things that are being done to solve it, and the direction this is moving in the future. Could you go to the next slide, Lauren? And there we go. Thank you very much. We can just bring them all up, click a couple of times. So methane venting on sites, it's a fairly large problem right now. According to the IPCC, methane has a global warming intensity of 25 times that of CO2. It's estimated that we have fuel gas pneumatics in use on over 1 million well sites globally. That equates to over 500 million tons of CO2 per year, or the equivalent of 116 million cars, or 22% of all the coal-fired power plants. Next slide, please. Real quick refresher on how gas pneumatics work. In our industry, we use high pressure gas for things like opening and closing control valves, measuring process conditions, and running injection pumps. Problem is that on most remote locations, we don't have access to compressed air, so we have to rely on high pressure gas from the well. And after we use that, we vent that to the atmosphere. Next slide, please. There are 2 solutions to this problem. Electrification, deactuation, and pumps is typically a cost-effective route for smaller pads. This option can become cost prohibitive as you move up to more wells per site, typically once you get over 3. It also has a couple of drawbacks from speed and delivery times. The other option is to replace the high pressure gas with compressed air, keeping your traditional pneumatic actuators. Both options do require additional power. And when Westgen started up, we ran into a small problem with this that we didn't expect. Next slide. So we call this problem the power generation gap. I know it sounds a little bit ridiculous, but you can pick up a 5 kilowatt generator at Canadian Tire for less than $1,000. If you want something that has the reliability you need for a remote location, they really don't have any technologies that fit between 5 and 30 kilowatts. Traditional options like tags and fuel cells tend to stick under about 1 kilowatt. And then when you get into microturbines or traditional natural gas recips, you're over 30 kilowatts. Next slide. So about 3 years after we set out to solve this goal, we developed the EPOD, which stands for Engineered Power on Demand. EPOD is primarily solar power, but has an internal combustion engine that backs up, capable of operating on raw well gas. For the first time, limitations of these engines related to fuel gas quality and maintenance interval have been overcome. while not causing increases to capital cost or maintenance costs for producers. Next slide, please. By integrating some of the common well site components into a modular shop fabricated package, we were able to reduce the capital cost of new well site components, or sorry, of new well sites compared to today's gas venting designs. Next one. By eliminating gas venting and reducing gas usage, the EPOD only burns 1 to 3% of the gas that you would typically be venting. We were able to increase the reliability of a site over winter by eliminating freezing conditions and reduce annual operating costs for these sites. Next slide, please. We also worked with a recognized subject matter expert in the pneumatic emission space to estimate emissions from well sites. We found that even after high to low bleed retrofits were performed, there was still a large amount of venting from dynamic actuation of the actuators. By moving to an EPOD system, we were able to create a step change in well site emissions, going beyond low bleed and able to reduce the emissions by greater than 99% on an average well pad. Move to the next slide, please. Within a first year deployment, we now have dozens of units deployed or in the works with 17 different oil and gas companies across Canada and the United States. In the beginning of 2020, we started to look to move the solution into the retrofit market. The EPOD was designed with incorporating and modularizing as many features as possible to minimize fieldwork and construction time on new well sites. Existing well sites don't have this challenge. So with that in mind, we set out to develop a purpose-built solution for the retrofit market. In conjunction with Emissions Reduction Alberta and Sustainable Development Technology Canada, as well as 11 producer partners, this project kicked off over the past summer. As part of this project, Westgen conducted a field monitoring of dozens of brownfield sites to better understand real-world design conditions and improve modeling of emissions. Westgen is currently in the process of deploying 10 EPODs to legacy sites for the purpose of data gathering. By coordinating the design, construction, and maintenance of these units, we're able to develop a better development strategy and understand some of the difficulties that we face when deploying these on legacy sites. Next slide. So our purpose-built solution, we've tentatively called EPOD Lite, is currently in the prototyping phase. We're targeting commercial deployment in Q2 of 2021. The end goal of the project is to show that instrument air retrofits can be completed at a price point that allows the project to be fully funded by carbon credits and provide positive economic returns to the producer. That's a quick summary of the product and what we're doing. I'm going to pass this off to Tim so he can talk about some of the challenges that producers face in the field. And then I'll come back to discuss any questions.
Great, thanks, Ben. So just to preface this, so my experience that I'm speaking to here is kind of from the perspective of Painted Pony Energy, which was acquired by Canadian Natural about a month and a half ago now. So really just kind of what drove us in the direction of the EPOD in the first place. And I guess this is, you know, more from a new site design. So we had a requirement and a desire to meet kind of the incoming regulations, which obviously limit the venting of methane off of new well pads. And so we were looking for solutions. Our existing designs kind of put us in a place where we had some devices that were electrified and some that were pneumatic. So we were looking for a solution to kind of bring in a reliable instrument air system to convert the remainder of the devices on our sites, and also provide some power. So the EPOD, where they came in for us was they allowed us to do that and also offset some of the costs where we were able to eliminate installing a standalone MCC. And we eliminated also kind of the other small remote power solutions we were otherwise going to be purchasing, and also our heat trace package. So, you know, from a capital perspective, it wasn't a huge, wasn't difficult for us to rationalize in terms of an uptick. And on obviously the offsets we were going to see in terms of, you know, carbon tax emissions and whatnot, we're going to ultimately offset that regardless. So we actually put in the first one about just over a year ago now, and you know, it's been a great success on that site. I would say, you know, we, aside from some initial startup challenges that we had, you know, it's run basically solidly for the last year. So and I guess the other aspect that kind of drove us in this direction, or specifically towards the EPOD, was their focus on reliability and ease of maintenance. So, and those are two of the things that we've really, you know, seen, I guess, shine over those last 12 months. And, you know, it's a very well-designed package, and they have a good understanding of some of the challenges that face producers out in the field.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Tim. Do we have any questions at this time?
Very good. So thank you both, Ben and Tim. And Shay, did we get any questions?
No questions so far.
Okay, well, I am curious, Ben and Tim, for a side-by-side, if you will, distinction between the EPOD and the EPOD Lite and the greenfield and, if you will, the retrofit market. So if you could compare and contrast, that would be really awesome.
For sure. So on the greenfield market, the concept of EPOD was to integrate as many components as we can from an existing site. So, or sorry, from a new site. So we've got the power generation, air, if that's what you're looking for. It can replace your MCC. It's got a UPS. It has a whole bunch of features that aren't needed on an existing site where you're coming in after the fact. Also from a price point, if you've already bought a UPS or if you've already integrated everything, it doesn't make sense to pay the extra to have those features up front. So with EPOD Lite, what we've done is we've really just focused on creating enough air for the typical sites that we see. You don't typically see the really large mega pads on legacy sites. Are typically kind of 10 wells or less, and integrating a maintenance interval that makes sense for operators. So that was kind of the biggest challenge with EPOD Lite. Is there's a lot of technologies that are out there from a power generation standpoint that can go a year or 2 years without maintenance, but when you start looking at the instrument air side of things, we needed to find a way to get the whole package, that instrument air portion, also up towards that 1 to 2 year maintenance interval. So that was from hitting a price point that you need to be for a retrofit application to make sense. The largest challenge that we saw was definitely being able to get to that 1 to 2 year maintenance interval and still have the reliability that you need.
So the EPOD Lite is focused on supplying air and not the other power requirement be on site, because in a retrofit situation, there's probably already some solar panel or other ways to provide that power, and you save costs by not replacing them.
Correct. There's a relatively small amount of power that's available from EPOD Lite as well. Most of these legacy sites are running off a tag or a fuel cell of some sort, so their power usage is probably 100 watts or less. A lot of the new sites, when producers get access to additional power, they're able to run things like heat trace, which can jump up that power load really quickly. So when we were looking at EPOD Lite, and these sites are already operating on 50 watts or 100 watts, the power requirement that we had to supply was much, much lower.
Okay. And
Mark, we have a question for Ben, if I could just interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
Awesome. So Ben, can you tell us more about your batteries, what type and how many, and the expected life?
For sure. So we're currently working with a lithium iron phosphate battery. They're designed for 15 to 30,000 cycles. So that should last the lifetime of the unit or of the site, 20 to 25 years. as far as how many, off the top of my head, I think it's 12 cells that we use, 12 or 14 cells that we use per ePod Lite.
So I was going to ask Ben, where are you in the development of the ePod Lite? I mean, when you talk about the retrofit market, it's a broad market. There's small sites, large sites, different kinds of sites. And just that question on batteries, how many? Well, it probably is a range, right, depending on the site requirements. And how are you on standardizing, or where are you on your development process? You mentioned you're making a 10 installation pilot to learn more. And where are you?
For sure. So the initial design is complete. We're prototyping, and we're getting ready for deployment of the 10 ePod Lite starting in January. We're hoping to be commercial by late March, after we've seen how these work in the winter a little bit. On the maintenance side, and on how do you handle a single well pad versus a 10 well pad with a single product and not make a whole bunch of changes. The secret that we've learned to maintenance, once again, because we can get power generation technologies to have a really long maintenance interval, it's really focused around the instrument air side, and you need large, powerful instrument air compressors that work in an on-off operation. And then what you do is you minimize the amount of time that those air compressors actually work. So the power usage of those air compressors is actually very high compared to the rest of the site. You'd be looking at a 5 to 7.5 horsepower air compressor, and you try and get that duty cycle of the air compressor really far down. What that does is it gives you the ability to, say you have a one well pad that's only pulling 1 CFM, your maintenance cycle for the whole package might be every 2 years. If you start to use a larger pad that's in the in like a 5 to 6 CFM range, so maybe an 8 well pad, all that you're changing there, you're buying the same device, your maintenance interval just goes back a little bit. So at that point, you might be looking at 12 to 13 months.
Awesome. Well, these are good numbers to start with. So awesome. So thank you. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Tim. Awesome review of the ePod Lite of Westgen Technologies. And as we mentioned, we will provide opportunities for you, the audience, to ask further questions through follow-up mechanism that I'll describe at the end. So thank you, and I'll move on to the next segment of our event, which is now on chemical injection pump installations with Spartan Controls and Bonavista Energy. And I'm very delighted to have Brian Van Vliet of Spartan Control and Kendall Izzo of Bonavista. And both of them will describe the chemical pump offering and some of the immediate challenges and how they solve them to make a seamless transition in product. So I'll turn it over right now to Brian Van Vliet.
Thank you, Mark. Just wait till the slides come up. Yeah, perfect. Okay, yeah, so just wanted to provide an intro here as an overview. I know Mark was touching on the chemical injection pump, and so we're going to be speaking specifically to the LCO Crossfire, which is available both as an electric pump and as an air compressor. And our focus for today will be mostly on the air compressor side of that conversation. So I am joined here by Kendall as well. I'm just going to provide a brief overview of Spartan, and then Kendall will introduce the same for Bonavista. I'll go through the slides and we'll have a conversation similar to the last focus conversation. Next. So Spartans work closely with customers in all industries, as shown at left, to create a sustainable modern world with innovative automation. Spartan's differentiated customer service, lifecycle and infrastructure expertise support industry's operations. Our know-how from Western Canadian industry, including our IP and solutions, have been implemented globally as well, as shown at the locations marked at right. Spartan is employee owned and very entrepreneurial, and we've worked with industry to document now over 9 megatons of CO2 reductions, which is equivalent to about 700,000 cars off the road. So pretty significant, and that's just what we've tracked. There's a whole bunch more we have yet to track as well. So I'll introduce Kendall at this point, and he can share some background as well.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Hey, Kendall, he's out here with Bonavista. Yeah, Bonavista is mid-size natural gas production company based primarily in Alberta. My recent focus has been looking at GHG reduction projects. And yeah, I worked closely with Brian and Spartan on installing an LCO air compressor and glycol heat trace pump.
Perfect. Okay, so back on the slide deck. So for those of you that were able to join at the methane emission reduction forum online, I had this slide as well. You know, industry is faced with this goal of achieving a 40 to 45% reduction in methane emissions from a 2012-2014 baseline. There's millions of dollars being invested in this, and we view that as kind of a carrot for industry to take steps towards compliance and doing that in a more cost-effective manner. So I think, you know, kudos to PTAC with the support they provided with the Methane Consortia program. That's really been an enabler for the adoption of the LCO crossbar as well. Next. So if you're not interested in carbon offsets, there's opportunity with other levers as well that can reduce your capital cost to implement. So PTAC has this program. It's supporting the LCO crossbar both as a chemical injection pump, electric, an air compressor, and we have a project window until May 2021. So what was really nice about this funding is that we had a decent window to apply for it. When you get the nod, we have a decent window to implement. And so, you know, we're achieving a specific, measurable, achievable, reasonable, and timely outcome. So it was really well set up. With the PTAC funding, there's 50% of the costs that can be covered. It's provided in 3 increments. So upfront, they give a third of the capital of their 50% towards getting it going. And then upon proof of purchase and installation, we can have the other third provided. And then once you've shown what that technology was able to achieve as far as the CO2 reduction, we get the final third from PTAC. What's also really valuable is that this is stackable with the MTIP funding. So you still need to meet the criteria, of course, of MTIP. So making sure that your technology is less than $130 per ton on an annual basis, or less than $40 per ton in the lifetime of the project. These can be combined to actually fully cover the capital cost of the project in its installed condition. And again, really helpful that these funds are available until May 2021. So if there's no interest in achieving an ROI with carbon offsets and actually making money, then reducing your upfront capital cost is certainly advantageous as well. Next. So when we get the go ahead, it's a go. And so what we're going to touch on here was what's done for the baseline. Really, really important. I'll come back to that point at the end. Baseline, baseline, baseline. If you don't understand what's out there, then it's really hard to make an informed decision what you're going to do to reduce the footprint of those operations. But as I mentioned, there's a way off between generating carbon offsets and reducing your capital cost. It really depends on the drivers for the organization and what that payback actually looks like. And so we want to be mindful then of the different considerations that are needed to achieve that desired retrofit outcome. We want to make sure that we're headed in the same direction, that we're doing that as efficiently as possible. Next, please. So here we see a trend of the installed LCO crossfire air compressor. You can see here in red, we have the supply pressure in kPa, I believe. And so, you know, you're typically supplying a control loop with, you know, like a 6 to 30 PSI input signal, 241 kPa. And you want to hold it there so you have reliable pneumatic pressure. If you drop below too far, then you may not be able to fully stroke the actuator or fully stroke a chemical injection pump too if it continues to run an instrument error, and therefore unable to inject it into the process line at the needed flow rate to require. Here we see yellow is operating hours. You can see that there was a reset done on purpose about a third of the way through this trend. And then the green line is the air compressor itself, and you're looking at the RPM there, and you can see how stable that operates after the system has been optimized. So you can see there's some work that was done when it was first commissioned as well. There were some leaks that we came across that needed to be fixed that were not associated with venting. These were more fugitives, that they weren't leaking by design, but they need to be maintained. And so it's really important to make sure that you're sizing the system, it's fit for purpose, and that is achieved by mitigating some of the unplanned foreseeables as well. So next. So I mentioned baseline. So what was done for the baseline? We want to reduce or eliminate. That's really the question that we're asking ourselves. And so if we're going to eliminate, one of the options is to shut in that asset. I don't think anyone here in Alberta or the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin really wants to shut in a producing asset that's profitable prematurely for venting conservation or fugitive conservation. So then we're left with, could we capture what's being emitted? Could we electrify the site, or could we use instrument air? Both of those are pathways, or all three of those rather are pathways to zero. So then we need to figure out what sites are the best candidates. And if we're going to figure out the best candidate, we have to be considering all the criteria that are there. And so we're mindful of, the CO2 that's available to be generated, and that's tied to your fuel gas use, whether that's purchased or that could be sold through its conservation. We also want to be understanding what type of asset that is that's actually venting. So this goes beyond just merely making models. It's really important to be a subject matter expert in that domain, that we can provide the more specific information and holistic too. As Ben touched on, there's conservation with steady state reductions, but then there's the understanding of how active is that control loop itself? How much is that actuator actually moving? And are there any other venting forms associated with the instrument? So you can have steady state, you can have the output pressure, and then you can also have a form of venting that's called transient. And I know that was a consideration criteria with a level controller that we recently improved as well. So other criteria that we see there, what the horizon is for future production. Of course, your rate of decline with the well. If something's at end of life, you may be shutting it in before we need to achieve that compliance, let's say with low bleed at a brownfield by January 1st, 2023. And that's understood, that you have to be mindful of how many dollars you're going to put into an older asset. Also need to be understanding what that demand is, and if there's opportunity for reduction, actually to help conserve the power or the remote energy that's needed to operate an asset like an air compressor. Same applies with the pump conversation. So understanding if that's going to be tied in with instrument air, or do you want to electrify? Because once you electrify a pump, there's opportunity to actually optimize the performance of that chemical injection pump, and you can conserve the volume of chemical that you're also using. So there's an OPEX saving that can be realized there that's achievable with an electric pump, and it's harder to achieve with a pneumatic pump. Understanding what your supply pressure needs to be. I mentioned most loops are 6 to 30, often your ESDs though. Emergency shutdown valves are often powered with a higher supply pressure. It could be 60 PSI, 80 PSI, and the LCO crossfire air compressor is certainly capable of that as well. But when I have a higher discharge pressure, there's a draw, and we want to be mindful of that with the remote power supply as well. I mentioned carbon offsets, so it's that trade-off. With carbon offsets, one of the big changes that we saw here earlier this year was with the revision of Directive 60, we had the ability now for brownfield sites to be generating carbon offset for a period of 8 years. It was originally defined in the carbon offset protocol. We had that protocol ending on December 31st, 2022. And so looking at the ROI when we have now just over a 2-year period of time for generating offsets is a very different conversation than having an 8-year window to do the same thing. I've touched on the power available at site. Having that in a reliable form, of course, is the most important part of that conversation. We think about days of autonomy, et cetera, if we're sizing a remote power solution. And that's certainly applicable to solar, but there's other forms of energy, of course, where we got to think about days of autonomy as well, and what the backup is going to be for that. The last point I have there is the SCADA infrastructure. So if we're optimizing an asset, maybe we want to see the performance of that asset remotely. And we have to think about how that's going to be integrated properly. And there's some lifting that happens with that based on the infrastructure you have at that site, or if this is going to be a standalone with this ability to communicate independently. Okay, next slide. Please.
Should be coming. There we go.
Yeah, awesome, thank you. So here's a generic situation that you have capital you're going to be investing in a solution that helps to reduce fuel gas usage. And so if we think about the opportunity to generate carbon offsets, there's an offset that will be generated every quarter, every annual basis with the installation of that technology, and there'll be a cumulative effect, as you see with that gray bar. There's also going to be fuel gas savings that are achieved. And with that, those two things combined, we have a cumulative net Canadian value that you can see provides a return on investment. And it'll be very specific to the window you have available. Typical carbon offsets, again, are available for generation over an 8-year period of time, unless otherwise specified in the protocol specifically. Next, please. So here we have a situation that we're not interested in carbon offsets, and here we want to be just reducing our capital costs. So PTAC is instrumental in this regard, and if it can be stacked with the methane technology implementation plan, we have the opportunity then to recover that capital cost really quickly, and we can realize the fuel gas savings. If the fuel gas cannot be sold, though, it's not really a value adder per se for the wellhead production. Maybe this is an oil site and that fuel gas conserve just doesn't have the infrastructure to actually bring it to market. If we do have that infrastructure, though, as you see on the next slide, then there can be a case for reducing your CapEx, but still achieving an ROI because of the fuel gas saved as well. And so there's, it really depends what your goals are, as I mentioned up front, what the outcome is and how you want to plot your journey on achieving that outcome. There are certainly different ways to tackle this, and it really just depends on the drivers for your organization. Next, please. So in summary, there are a number of things to be mindful of, and I've listed some of the key here, but I can't emphasize enough the importance of the baseline. To make an informed decision with what's going to be implemented at that site, we have to know what's there to be able to determine what that demand will be or what the options are for reducing the GHG footprint of that operation. We also want to be, as I mentioned here, cognizant of the near and long-term outcomes. If we are willing to have a longer ROI on an air compressor, then certainly that's an acceptable opportunity through carbon offsets. But if we really focus on the near-term cash flow available, we want to make sure we're addressing that as well with a program like the MCP or MTIP, etc. So be mindful of the devil in the details. There's nuances with the different programs as well. Got to understand that to make sure that we're making informed decisions on using those levers as they support that opportunity. I can't emphasize enough the importance of collaboration, understanding who will be supporting and leading. It's a team here, and having a kickoff up front before we proceed with the retrofits is just as integral and important to the successful outcome as the other criteria. I'm not going to go into the detail of the other points you see there, but at this point, happy to have input from Kendall as he shares his personal experience from Bonavista and open up to Q&A while trying to stay on time. Thank you.
So just checking if Kendall has final comments to provide on experience at Bonavista with these programs.
Yeah, no, I think Brian pretty much hit all the high points there. Yeah, I don't really have a lot to add.
So it's good to have all these options, right? Not all sites are the same, and not all circumstances, like Brian says, the baseline. So it's good to have options to find the right option for the right site. So Shay, do we have questions?
No questions so far, Mark.
All right. So, and Brian, I just want to, it's probably obvious maybe, but just to reiterate from your side, it's a great time to be in for the industry right now, because there's multiplicity of options on to get the emissions down, whether it's in air or chemical pumps, or like putting everything down hole, like Kara at Modern Wellbore described. And there's also a multiplicity of funding mechanisms depending on the financial objective of the oil company or the baseline and the sites, right? So you can help people navigate through all that.
Absolutely, yeah. And I can add too that the MCP program still has opportunity to be aligning with other producers to do more work like I've described here today. So we have that window till May and I'm happy to engage folks that are interested if there's a desire to do so. I should also add, Steve Froller wanted to pass along, thank you very much to PTAC for the support to the organization, and also to the Industrial Research Assistance Program with NRCan and Alberta Innovates too. And you can see how integral those funding channels are to the and commercial availability of this product here, built and made here in Calgary, which is a pretty cool story. So.
And
Mark,
Brian,
we do have a question.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. So this is for Brian. So Brian, who typically carries out the evaluation?
So we support that, but we also work with different companies that are there involved with the methane monitoring regulation and providing expertise as subject matter experts as well. Those are our customers just the same. So I'm involved with lots of that kind of work every day, and we are investing that time as a means of achieving an outcome for the solution that we provide to. So we are somewhat agnostic that we look at the different options that are available, but of course we have solutions in most of these spaces as well, and so it's important to see which one of those has the best performance or the lowest cost to deploy as well, because they absolutely, as we've mentioned several times, they need to be cost effective. So I certainly support that with a team of other folks at Spartan, and we work with customers to do the same.
So Brian, what you're saying is if an oil company already has someone doing evaluation, you can work with them.
Absolutely, yeah. If you've already gone through a preliminary assessment, we're doing a lot of that work, as you can imagine, with the NRCan Emission Reduction Fund and with MTIP as well. With those programs having a near-term deadline of November 30th, or first come, first serve for MTIP, of course, and then others with a longer roadmap where they're going to be applying for NRCan with the Emission Reduction Fund in Q1 of 2021 as well. So this is a journey, and we're just helping folks make informed decisions as they are on that pathway. So
awesome. So thank you, Brian. Thank you, Kendall. It's awesome to have you on the event. And I'll move on to the next segment of our event, which is with Calscan and Henry Tessier, and he's joined by James Martin of Advantage Oil and Gas. And I'm excited to hear about electrification, which is yet another way to get at the same outcome using pretty much some of the same programs. So Henry, I will turn it over to you to make an introduction and bring in the conversation with James.
Thank you very much, Mark. You can hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yes, I'd like to thank PTAC for putting this doing this presentation again for us. We're trying to support PTAC as much as possible, and we're pretty happy with some of the programs that they've been doing, like MRF, over the last few months for sure. So we ended up getting a project through PTAC, the PTAC MCP project summary, like Spartan got with their chemical pump. And our project is pretty well deployment of our baroelectric linear actuators and related solar electric control packages. And the summary is the project aims to demonstrate Calscan's baroelectric linear actuators are related to electric controls. And then by installing installations either greenfield or brownfield in Alberta with junior and intermediate type producers. So we want to just try to get some of our equipment out a little bit more out to helping out the juniors. So big part of this program, it is a 50% discount that they receive on all the equipment. And they can also use the MTIP program if you needed to. So you're getting close to about 90% discount on the equipment and even labor and equipment out there through the MTIP program. So it has been a pretty good program. We've received, we've got four producers on board, 2 producers that are using on the brownfield side of things, and 2 producers on the greenfield. and pretty happy to have James Martin with Advantage Oil and Gas. They've used the program on the greenfield side of things to get their 50% discount on some of the equipment. So it's been a good program for us. Like Brian was mentioning, it's till May of 2021. And we're still looking for a few other producers to help out a little bit, but so far the program has been going very well. Next screen, please. I think what it's done also on our installations, we've worked closely with the juniors and intermediate companies. You know, the biggest part, I think, especially when we're doing brownfield, is really trying to adapt to the valves, the equipment, the process equipment that they have on site. You know, if we're using different type of valves and different type of equipment, it makes it very difficult to do the installs, and also you know, also on cost. And especially if, you know, we have an older well and it's a sour well, now we're ripping things apart, ripping apart valves out. The guys have to be masked up, so it's a bit of a disadvantage on that side of things. So we've come up over the last 6 months to really help the industry on doing the replacements, from taking the pneumatic devices out, electric actuators to, you know, for the replacement. So that's made a big difference for us, and also for the end user. The cost has been a big saving on that side of things too. So if you know some of the examples here on the back pressure before and after, so we're really trying to keep the valves, the process valves the same, and adding any kind of some of our linear actuators and also our quarter turn actuators. If you go to the far right on the level control valves, we're able now to we added brackets that we can actually add to a North Seal type valve, so the valve pretty well stays the same, and also for a Fisher type D2, D3, D4 type valve. So it's coming along pretty good on that side of things on the retrofits. And like I mentioned, like Brian mentioned, also is key. You know, for the junior operator, or intermediate, we're really looking at their well sites, what well sites are producing, you know, with a lot of dynamic activation through their separator controls, and the ones that are venting a lot. So that's really the ones that we're really tackling. And you know, sour wells, or you know, a lot of wet gas wells. So that's the ones that we're looking at, and it's been you know, a good success on that side. And on the greenfield, again, we've used the PTAC MCP program on the greenfield for the 50% discount, and that's been a good way to do. You know, we've had a few customers that like Advantage Oil and Gas to try a few of these electric controls and see if it's going to be able to fit to their well sites. And so it's been a good application on that side of things. We've used our linear actuators and our quarter turn actuators, and really not changing dynamics too much of their process. You know, we're keeping the same valves that they had with their cookie cutter separator packages they had in the past, so that's helped quite a bit. And we've also developed our bare fail-safe controls, where if we lose power, we have a UPS system in our bare fail-safe controllers that we patent, and it's able to, you know, shut down if we lose batteries or lose power or lose the main fuse from the RTU. We'll start shutting down all our electric actuators. So that's been a big bonus too. Okay, next screen. And this I'll move over to for James Martin, who has been one of our partners, consortium partners on our project. And I'll pass it on to you, James.
Okay, thanks, Henry. So yes, I'm James Martin with Advantage Oil and Gas, and we're trialing this technology here from Calscan on electric chokes. So Advantage is interested for obvious reasons in eliminating our methane emissions for all the reasons that Emil did such a good job explaining in his presentation. I notice he's gone, so Kara, if I could please ask you to pass on my kudos to Emil there. But he explained very well why we want to get rid of those emissions. And so we have many trials ongoing to try to come up with the best way to eliminate those emissions, and this is just one of those. This particular application, as you see here, this is a new site, so it's a 3-well pad in our glacier field. And this is mainly it's leaner gas, so it's a very simple site. And you know, there's a greenfield application obviously for this technology. So you see the main pipe rack leading up to the top of the page with the flare, sort of down towards the bottom right. There's a chemical skid, and then you have lines coming from each of the wells. On those lines, there's essentially just an ESD and a choke. And long ago, Advantage had switched over to electric chemical pumps, which they powered with TEG. And so we had the electrical generation available, and really the only methane emitters we had were the ESD and the choke themselves. So this is a trial to eliminate the larger of those two, which is the choke, in terms of emissions. And we've gone with electric here. The ESD is still gas operated, so it will emit methane. Of course, you could use a hydraulic there, but we've not had much take up from the field on that kind of ESD. So we're sticking with the tried and true, and we'll have follow up, you know, technology deployment to eliminate the methane there. You do see a shack for each well there. Now that's just a rental sand separator, so those are not going to stay there permanently, and that solar panel that you see is integral to the rental separator. So that's not part of our site here. As I said, this is generated with TEG, and they'll only remain there for about a month, and then they'll be gone, and we'll be down to just the one methane emitter. Again, it's the ESD. So the next slide is just a close-up of the actual choke, if you want to move to that one. So that's the Calscan actuator on top there, and forum choke. And this is the first deployment in the glacier field of both this style of choke as well as the electric actuation. So it's definitely a trial. And personally, I've used both in the past and had good success. But like I say, this is a different field, different people, so we'll see how this goes. I'm very encouraged from what I've seen in the past, and I'm hopeful that we have good success here. And you know, it goes without saying that we have a large inventory, a sizable maybe inventory is a better term for pneumatically actuated chokes, and we do have plans to replace those with some non-methane emitting device, of which this is a competitor, and we'll see how it goes and move on from there.
Awesome. Very good, James. So, Henry, do you have some closing comments, or should I go to see if there's any questions?
No, I think, you know, like just going back, what James, just adding to James on the choke side of things. Again, now those ones were 4 to 20 milliamp control, right, through their RTU. Very low power, and didn't really have to upgrade any of the tags that they have on site. And also we're adding our fail-safe modules at those sites. So that made a big difference for them also on regarding HAZOPs, making sure it is fail-safe. Okay, so you know, we have a heartbeat checking the RTU all the time. If the RTU fails, we can shut things down. And I think on electric controls, that's very, very important. to make sure that we're able to, shut the wells in safely and without having any kind of spills or any kind of damage.
Awesome. So your approach is minimizing intrusion, if you will, at the well site, and therefore cost and maximizing reliability as a result.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So and Shay, do we have any questions?
No questions yet.
No questions. So, and Henry, I'll just want to dig a little deeper into the retrofit versus greenfield offering for what you have, and are there any rules of thumbs or differences in how you would approach or design or recommend an installation, greenfield versus retrofit?
Yeah, the retrofit is a little bit more work, because we have to have a crew out in the fields. You're replacing, taking out the pneumatic actuators out, replacing some of the tubing, taking that, disassembling all that, and then having a crew to, put tech cables and making sure you have enough power on site. So you might have to add a few more solar panels and batteries. So it is a little bit more detailed for sure. And if you're looking at any kind of rebates, you might have to do a little bit of measurement on the venting before you do any kind of work on that side of things. So it's a little bit more, construction-wise and more people involved. On the greenfield, it's designed, if they have a chemical pump, electric chemical pump, and if all electric controls, we got one power source. RQ is all programmed, so it's a lot easier for the cookie cutter side of things. That's for sure. So it's easier. It's all done at the fab shop, and when it gets to the field, it's pretty well ready to roll. So that's helped a big difference on that. And then if you're doing any kind of carbon credits or anything, you're pretty well just estimating what your dumps are going to be doing.
Yeah, and the retrofit being more complicated, but on the other hand, it has more funding or incentive opportunities, right? So
yes, that's right, because you can stack with our program through PTAC and then also the MTIP. There's not really that many programs for greenfield on the greenfield side of things.
Yeah.
So that's made a bit of a difference on trying to sell some of our equipment on the greenfield. That's helped quite a bit. But you either go with a program like what we have with the 50% discount, or you go with the carbon credits.
Yeah, perfect. All right.
Mark, we have a quick question.
Oh, yep.
Yeah. So Henry, this is for you. Does your linear electric offer a true fail-safe?
No, it's not true fail-safe. So most electric actuators, they'll fail on signal loss. So our linear actuator has a 4 to 20 milliamp and 24 volts DC, for example, going to the actuator. So if I lose signal, if I lose a 4 to 20 milliamp signal, it will either fail open or fail close, whatever it's programmed for. So that's why we have to develop our bare fail-safe modules. So these modules are on a DIN rail. They're installed into the RT cabinet. And the reason why we did it this way, instead of putting batteries inside an actuator or capacitors or anything like that, it's a lot cheaper for our customers, and we can add up to 8 actuators. So it's kind of a game changer for our electric controls. So we have a UPS that we had to design that's designed for minus 40 degrees C. And also has 2 small batteries with it that is charging the batteries. So we'll have, if it's a 24 volt system, we'll have 2 30 amp type batteries. And then it goes through our fail-safe controller. So any output from the RQ, any digital output or any 4 to 20 output going to electric actuators goes through our fail-safe controller. And it doesn't matter what type of actuator it is, it'll still, if we lose the main power or lose our external batteries, backup batteries, either one, if we start shutting things down for making sure it's filled. Okay.
Awesome. All right, and thank you, Henry, and thank you, James. Excellent overview of this brand new exciting technology for electrification of well sites. And I'll move on to our next segment, which is a different take. Again, it's awesome to see all these creative thinking going on with Bluesource and NAL Resources. And we will be covering medium emitting gas-driven pneumatic pumps, like low bleed chemical pumps, if you will. And I'm very pleased to introduce Yvan Champagne of Bluesource, and he will be joined by Brian Spiegelman of NAL Resources, who has partnered with them. So I will turn it over to Brian to start the segment. Welcome, Brian.
Mark, Brian was in a meeting this morning and he may still be tied up. I just pinged him to see if he was freed up.
He was showing up on my list of people who were online, so that's why I went like that. But go ahead.
Okay, and Brian, if you do hop on, please let us know, and I'll hand it back over to you. Oh, no. Okay. So thank you, Mark and PTAC and the entire team over there for putting on this session. What we're going to talk about today, we're going to try to, again, stay within the timeline so that there might be time for some questions, is to talk about one specific issue that not only ourselves and NAL, but a number of other producers have identified in the market as it pertains to chemical pumps. And the issue is this. Chemical pumps and the emissions associated with them are not one and the same, meaning there's significant variability in terms of emissions for each specific pump that is out in the field. And the general rule of thumb applies to this situation, which is 20% of pumps probably are responsible for 80% of the methane related emissions, leaving about a remaining 80% of all pumps out there that are probably only responsible for 20% of emissions. The challenge with this is that the remaining 80% of pumps likely do not have a financially viable pathway for replacement or retrofit in order to reduce those emissions, and as such are likely to go unchanged, meaning they will continue to vent methane out there because the financial imperative is not strong enough to replace them. So where this conversation started is in a discussion that Bluesource had with NAL, where as a result of our high to low bleed pneumatic controller retrofit program, which has been a huge success, we've replaced over 11,000 devices with 35 different oil and gas producers across Alberta over the last 3 years. We got challenged by NAL to say, hey, you're doing all this great stuff with controllers. Can you retrofit a pump? And our initial answer was, no, I don't think we can. And we went away from the meeting thinking, you know what? I don't think that's possible, but let's think about it a bit. And so we reached out to a few of our partners to ask the question, is there a way that we can retrofit a pump, taking inspiration from the great work that Brian Van Vliet has done over at Spartan with the L2 relay? So for those of you who aren't familiar, the L2, the Fisher L2 level controller, Brian helped design an improved relay assembly that can simply be swapped into an existing L2 relay or controller, meaning you do not have to replace the entire device. And by doing so, you can significantly reduce transient emissions from that controller. That innovation alone is responsible for close to half of all controllers we have replaced in our program, and will lead to multiple million tons of reductions in Alberta. So the question was posed to us, the challenge was dropped, can we do this with pumps? So we went away and thought about it, and we realized that there could be a pathway, meaning can we deliver the same amount of chemical through an existing pump without having to replace the entire pump, but just do so in a more efficient way? And initially, the answer looked like yes. And the design principle is fairly simple. If you have a pump with a plunger that is small, that pump needs to stroke more times to deliver the same amount of chemical as if it was using a larger plunger stroking fewer times. And so we went away and thought about this and thought, is there a way to actually measure this? Can we actually deliver significant material and measurable and predictable emission reductions by optimizing the plunger size? So thanks to our good friends over at PTAC. If you can switch over to our slides, please, Lauren, that would be great. Thank you. So we go to the next slide. So thanks to our good friends at PTAC, we submitted an application to the MCP program in conjunction with GreenPath, PTW, and NAL. And our mission was simple: test 30 to 40 5100 series pumps to determine if we could get a meaningful reduction, if we could predict what that emission reduction would be, and if it would be consistent across different applications of that pump. We were successful in that process with PTAC. The testing began this summer. The process was relatively straightforward. We tested pump emissions prior to an optimization. We optimized the pump by changing gaskets, changing the plunger size, and then tested the pump again. All of the tests were completed this summer with NAL and Outlier Resources, another producer. With an assist from Spartan, GreenPath used their EMAS skid to do the testing. So the status of this project is we've completed the testing. We have the initial data results. The data still needs to be refined and analyzed to complete our assessment. And we'll be looking forward to release a report in the next couple of months. If you can go to the next slide, please. So the initial indication is yes, there can be a material emission reduction created by optimizing a pump assembly. We still don't have a final range, but it looks to be at least about a 40% reduction. Again, it is different based on the pump and the circumstances and use of that pump, but we think it is still a fairly material reduction. If all of the data lines up and is compelling, we'll be looking to submit this to Alberta Environment to get a deviation request in order to open a new pathway for pump optimization, which we think will go a long way in helping reduce emissions from that 80% population of lower emitting pumps, which I think will again play a pretty important role in reducing overall emissions out in the industry. And I'll leave it there if there are any questions.
That's awesome. So just checking here if Brian was able to join us. I'm assuming not, and that he sends his regrets. So I'm glad that you, so Yvonne, so so the next step is a report and the pathway with Alberta Environment. Any other work with that could be some of the producers online here might be interested in hearing more or testing more or being part of some of your work? Is that something you have capacity for? Or
yeah, it's a great question. I think we're trying to assess this initial set of data, and that will really let us or give us an indication of whether additional testing is required. The reason we've gone ahead and done 30 to 40 tests is that under the Alberta offset system, to get a statistically valid sample of measurements, you need at least 30. That is the defined criteria. And again, once we can better assess the data, we'll have a better sense of whether we will need to complete more tests. I know this has been the case for other emission factors that have been developed in the past on other types of equipment. We've actually had to go out and perform more tests. So it's a little too early to tell at this point. But definitely if there are producers, if we do need to do more samples, we'd be more than happy to speak with producers who may be interested in participating. We hope we're going to be in a position next year where we can take the same approach that we've taken on pneumatic controllers to chemical pumps to again address that significant population of pumps that otherwise is just going to remain as is.
Awesome. And Shay, do we have any questions on this for Yvonne?
No questions so far, Mark.
So I have none either. I think it's very clear to me. It's very exciting to see this new thinking, and I'm glad that you were able to, Yvonne, to describe a bit how it happened through a meeting and thinking about further, and then proposing the project. And I'm very pleased to see it going forward. And I do think it will make a big difference in the industry next year to have these campaigns of addressing these chemical pumps that otherwise would not be economic to full change out.
Yeah, if I can just add one last point maybe on that, Mark, is that, you know, I think our assessment of the methane space and the methane challenge in Alberta is that, you know, there is no silver bullet to solve this problem. It's a silver buckshot strategy. It's going to take multiple programs, multiple ideas executed by multiple partners, service providers, technology providers to tackle it. And it's great to hear all the great solutions that have been discussed here this morning. There's lots of great ideas and technologies that are ready to implement, which is really exciting, I think, for all of us.
Yes, awesome. So I'll move on to the next segment, which was with Brian Spiegelman, and I believe that he hasn't joined us. So I will just describe it very quickly because I have his slide deck, and it's only the one slide. And it is through the, we've mentioned the MCP program of PTAC, and in 2019, we invited proposals, and NAL by themselves applied to it for a project about instrument airflow meters. So in the instrument air system, you do need, if you want to get the carbon offsets, you need to measure how much methane emissions reduction can be attributed to the system. And one of the ways is to measure how much air is being used by the instrument air system, because that air otherwise would have been gas. And airflow meters are, of course, not new. They've been used for decades, but it does matter to get a good airflow meter of the right size for those systems that are very precise to maximize the amount of offset credit that you can generate. And my coarse understanding of it, I'm not an expert in this field, is that if you use an airflow meter with an error range of being, say, plus or minus 20%, your offsets will be down to the lower boundary of that error bar, like 80%. If you use an airflow meter with an error bar of plus or minus 5%, then you're at 95% level on your offset claim, and you gain so much more payments over the 8-year period because you have a more precise equipment. So I believe NAL has tested some of those and is also looking for more options on low-cost, precise airflow meters in that size range for instrument air. And I will leave it at that. So if anybody has questions or comments to jump on this, Shay, if there's anything on the chat.
Nothing so far, Mark.
And otherwise, I will move on to the next item on our agenda today, which is...
Sorry to interrupt. I think Brian might be available. I'm just trying to see. I think his meeting just ended. Brian, can you hear us? Oh, he might not be available, but he may be able to, if you come back to it, perhaps. If you
I will come back at the very end. So I just had a couple of minutes of closing remarks. I definitely didn't want to stretch that out. So I wanted to express my thanks and my, if you will, admiration for all the work that starting from Alberta Innovates, and a lot of these projects here would not be possible without the support of Alberta Innovates at the very front end to support the de-risking, and other funding agencies of governments, but also all the innovators and the oil and gas companies who take some risk at their well sites to entertain those trials and test this new device here and that other device there, and as opposed to go with the solution they've used for the last few years that they have no risk in selecting. So we are thankful for all of those. And I am impressed by the multiple options that are available to address venting and pneumatics, all the way from electrification to different flavors of chemical pumps, electric chemical pumps, low bleed chemical pumps, instrument air, and very out of the box, if you will, move everything downhole like modern Wellbore is developing. So move everything, keep everything down 1,000 meters below the surface. So you don't need to do baseline measurements then. So and the multiplicity of funding options at the moment. So there's been a bit of a very busy time for a lot of people with all these programs. They're all welcome. They're all coming at the same time, and they all have different specific terms and conditions, and we have to learn them all. And they will not all be available for forever. So it affects, definitely puts a premium on acting now. Some of those budgets will be depleted, hopefully very quickly. And so all of you out there, if you have an intention on availing yourself of any of the programs that were described by our speakers, you will receive from PTAC here as part of your attendance of this event, and those who also registered were not able to attend, a thank you note with the link to the recording and the contact information of our panelists, so you can interact with them on deployment or action on what they have to offer. So with that, I will do a last check for Brian, if you were able to join us. And
I'm here, Mark.
Oh, awesome! Just we're just like those hockey games where a goal is scored just 2 seconds before the bell rings. Awesome.
I just got back.
Okay, so Brian, if we can thank you very much. I know you have a busy morning, a very important morning, and thank you very much for squeezing us in here. I briefly described your project on airflow meters, and I'll just turn it over to you so we had the slides there. So, and Lauren just put the slide on screen.
Thanks very much, Mark. And I apologize, everybody. I had an important meeting I had to attend that went a little bit late. Yeah, thanks for that. You know, and I know that there's been some conversations on this call already regarding instrument air, and I just wanted to sort of broadly put some thoughts out around instrument air. And admittedly, it's an area of high interest, high investigation at NAL, and I trust that other companies as well. But I think it's from my vantage point, it's somewhat lacks a full broadness of understanding. And what I mean by that is, as an industry, we've done a really good job looking at pneumatic controllers, looking at chemical pumps, you know, different electrification opportunities. But when it comes to instrument air, the componentry maybe isn't 100% understood. The costs, the relative comparison between what you're getting for that item and what it can actually mitigate aren't as understood as it can be. What the site characteristics are, and I'm looking to start more conversation on the broader scope of instrument air, and coupled with instrument air is the instrument air meters themselves. I understand and I'm knowledgeable enough that you do require an airflow meter that can measure the amount of air that is going through the system, so that you can establish credits off of that variance or that differential. You know, those airflow meters need to be of a certain accuracy. You can buy the cheapest one on the market, but if it doesn't have the range and the accuracy, you may be giving up more on the crediting side than you've saved on the instrument meter itself. And so, you know, the pneumatics protocol has been updated, it's been extended. I think the future is very bright for instrument air type applications, and I think it's all part of the stew. When I look at NAL's asset base, I went to the population and I said, hey, we've got some funding out here. Well, what's the opportunity from an instrument air standpoint? And guys in the field have sort of their deep-seated feelings about tried it, don't want it, or they're stuck with one vendor. But then, you know, as credits have evolved, they don't understand the sort of the implications of sort of maybe going to what they're used to. We need to be able to think bigger picture, further afar, and some of the opportunities that are out there. And so from any specific equipment that we need, I think it's for me and maybe for others, it's sort of understanding what's the package that you're getting in an instrument airflow meter setup. And yeah, that's where I wanted to really leave the conversation. I'm open to alternatives. I know some of the vendors out there, but I'm open to more collaborative conversation on the opportunities. Thank you.
Yeah, and we do have a project where we can put that into practice. So it's not a theoretical conversation. So in closing, I did the closing remarks. So thank you, Brian, and stepping in kind of in overtime and scoring the goal in overtime. That's won the game. And well, thank you everyone for listening to us. And as I mentioned, the recording will be on the PTAC website for on-demand viewing. Feel free to pass it on to your colleagues. I think a lot of high quality information was provided today, and did not answer all the questions, but we make an effort to also offer you the ability to follow up with our presenters after the fact by providing them, with their permission, their contact information. So with that, I will bring this event to a close, and I thank everyone for participating. Thank you.
Thank you.